When choosing the area and choosing a property, everybody has their list of criteria that will dictate that, such as job, budget, schools, crimes. Well, a little bit different for every city, and Portland is no exception. We're going to break down what those differences are in this video.
Stay tuned to learn more.
All right, so we've got a list of 7 criteria that people commonly use, like we mentioned, jobs, to dictate where they live. And that's going to be a little bit different in every city. What your job is and where you live might be a little bit different if you're in the Bay Area or LA or Austin, Texas than Portland. And so real quick in this video, we're going to break down some of those differences for you. All right, so let's just get started with the first thing we have on the list here. We've got 7 things that people use, 7 criteria. The first thing is jobs. So what's a little bit different about jobs in Portland as opposed to somewhere in California?
Well, I think just geographically, there's such a high concentration of jobs on the west side in what would be considered or called the Silicon Forest. So this is Beaverton and primarily Hillsborough. So you have this Tualatin Valley on the west side of the river that has a super high concentration of jobs, not just tech, hardware, software, but a lot of manufacturing, a lot of apparel companies, and a lot of startups too. So a lot of industry and business on the west side of the river, a lot of people relocating to the Portland metro area, ultimately are have gotten hired at one of those companies. And if that's the case, if you're living on the east side of the river, on the east side, it's going to be pretty hard to commute on a daily basis to the west side. Similarly, if you got a job somewhere in downtown Portland, somewhere on the east side or in Clackamas County, living on the west side is going to make it pretty tough as far as commuting goes. So there would have to be a pretty big trade-off or a pretty good reason why you would want to live within or say like a 45-minute or hours drive every day one way, just to live in one spot and work in another. And one of the unique things about Portland is we're so sprawled. This is a tri-county area where you have, all of the west side, all of the east side, up north into Vancouver, and then suburbs extending to the south, where if you are moving to the wrong area or an area that's super far from where your place of employment is, you could really end up regretting that.
Yeah, and it can be deceptive too. If you're just mapping it, the traffic here can definitely vary. It can be really bad in some places, and sometimes it just depends on the time of day. Sometimes it's worse going south, sometimes it's worse going north, depending on the time of the day. So that's where you can get with us, and if you have questions about that commute and if a particular job or an area is going to work for a particular proximity that you're trying to live in, we can break that down for you better than Google can.
Yeah, some people might say, oh, I really love the hip neighborhoods in southeast or northeast Portland, but you're going to be working at Intel in Hillsborough, for example.
Yeah.
And sure, you could do that, and a lot of people do, but again, you're looking at quite a bit of windshield time on a daily basis, unless you're working remotely, obviously.
Yeah, more common now.
Yeah.
Okay, next on the list.
All right, next on the list is budget. Obviously, this is a big one, probably at the top of the list. The jobs piece we touch on first because so many people relocating to the Portland metro area are seeking employment or have got employment, and that will largely dictate where you end up living.
Yeah.
But the budget, of course, that's going to determine what you can get for your dollar and where. And not every area is created equal by any means. There are areas that are way more expensive, and typically these are going to be areas that feel a little more upscale than others. And there's going to be areas that are way more affordable, and then there's going to be this messy middle too. Yeah. So a lot of variety and a lot of variation in terms of what you can get when you look at budget. But you don't want to be spending all of your time looking into an area, starting to look at homes in an area that ultimately it's going to be a lot harder to get into based on what your budget might be.
Yeah, like Paul mentioned, it's sprawling here in Portland, and we have a combination of suburban, urban, and rural, and sometimes we'll encounter a situation where somebody can maybe go a little bit more rural and stretch their budget a little bit more and maybe get a little bit more, a larger lot size, a little bit more property, maybe get a larger home and still stay within the area that they want to stay or still stick within the commute that they want to stick within. So it's pretty dynamic as far as staying within your budget and getting what you want to get, or you might be able to get a little bit more more than you thought you could get, or maybe you don't need to spend as much. Maybe you can get what you want to get for a lower budget somewhere else. But the area itself, that's where Paul and I really come in, is to show you and really break down where's going to make the most sense for your budget.
Yeah, a couple of examples on that is, say you did get a job in a particular area and you want to be like a 5-minute drive, and based on your budget, you might be able to do a lot better than what's in that immediate area, based on the style of neighborhood or types of homes that are offered there. Alternatively, or another scenario would be, there is an area that you really, really love, but it's just priced a little bit higher than what the budget may allow for. Well, you could look at, any of the surrounding towns, neighborhoods, suburbs to that area, still be really close, still be in an area that has a really similar feel, but maybe get in at a price point that is a little more in line with what your budget is. Or there might be other suburbs or other neighborhoods that really offer a similar quality of life or feel, but don't necessarily carry the price tag.
All right, next on the list, schools.
Yeah.
Schools, so that's an important one if you have kids. That's always a consideration for people. We do have a separate video just on schools if you want to take a look at that video. But where it's going to get tricky for Portland and schools, if you look, if you're just doing Google searches, you're probably going to find that the schools in general might rank a little bit lower. Depends on what kind of metrics you're looking at, whether we're talking about like graduation rates, or test scores. But in general, Google searching, I think you probably get a little bit lower for the Portland metropolitan area compared to nationwide. But at the same time, you're going to see a lot of very, very highly rated schools, a lot of highly rated school districts. But it's not necessarily going to be the case that just because a school district is rated really high, that every school is going to be rated high in that school district. It's also not going to be the case too that I see some schools rated online, that have some sort of grade like a C or a B or whatever it may be. It's probably not entirely accurate, So the ratings with schools can definitely be misleading. And for Paul and I, as realtors, we're not supposed to speak directly to buyers about schools, but when we're speaking to a broader audience such as yourselves, we can weigh in on that, and we can direct you to different resources if you want to learn about schools online. But the thing about Portland schools is you're going to find a lot of really great schools. You're probably going to find some bad things about schools, Portland schools said online about the Portland school districts. But overall, we have really good schools here, and Paul and I can help you to direct you to resources that will kind of give you a better idea of where those are located at.
Yeah, there are about a half a dozen, maybe a little more, school districts in the Portland metro area. There's also a lot of private schools too, so there definitely are options, and you'll see a variety of rankings when you look at the school districts as a whole. Portland Public Schools is the largest school district. I believe Beaverton School District is the second largest. And you look at Beaverton School District, the district itself is rated an A-, but there's over 90 schools, elementary, middle, and high schools in that district. So they're not all an A-. And then again, too, like what Seth said, the rating that you see, some of those ratings that you see online don't necessarily always dictate exactly what the experience will be for the student. My wife has been a second grade teacher for the last decade, and I've had this conversation with her where, if you look at a school, look at the rating and kind of break that down, that doesn't necessarily tell the whole picture, again, specifically as to what the experience of the student is going to be. So it's always going to be a little bit of a roll of the dice when you move into a new area and enroll your kid into a school in an area that you don't know everything about. But I think there are a lot of things that we can do as far as just having conversations about what an area is like overall, and maybe help interpret, some of the either things that you read and what might be a little bit misleading, what might be a little bit accurate, and just go from there.
All right, next on the list, crime.
Yeah.
We do get asked about crime. Similar to schools, not supposed to speak directly to buyers about crime because it can lead to things such as steering, which we don't do, but more broadly speaking to you as a YouTube audience, we can certainly talk about crime, and it is going to be nuanced for Portland. If you watch the news at all, you've probably heard something about crime in Portland, and I think it's definitely fair to say that crime has ticked up in the Portland metro area, specifically Multnomah County, over the past few years. But is the crime bad? Where is it bad? How bad is it? Relatively speaking, it's going to be really nuanced. There's going to be plenty of places where the crime is really, really low. There's going to be places where crime is maybe ticking up a little bit. And Paul and I can really direct you to resources that will give you a better idea of maybe some things that you might want to watch out for. But I think the biggest point here is that if you're just solely watching the news and think that that Portland is burning or still burning or something to that degree, yes, there are some bad spots right now, but for the most part, there's a lot of spots that aren't bad at all too. So that's we can get into the nuances a little bit more with you as far as like I said, directing you to resources. But the crime here, I guess another thing I would say too, just anecdotally, get a lot of buyers from California. It's all relative, right? So I think people generally tell us relative to where they came from, regardless of the bad spots or the good spots in Portland, it doesn't seem like it's as bad as where they came from.
Yeah, a lot of what you can read online, whether it's in the media or through different resources, websites that rate crime, violent crime, property crime, it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. And there's going to be suburbs in Portland or neighborhoods in Portland that look, feel really safe, but then you look at, say, like the property crime, and it might be a little bit higher than the next town over that might feel a little more unsafe, for example. So you have to spend some time in these areas. You have to do a little bit more digging, and obviously we can add some context, around interpreting some of this. Again, we can't steer people in one direction or another. I think for a lot of people, you spend an hour, half a day, whatever, spend an afternoon driving around an area, you're going to get a pretty clear sense as to, okay, this is a pretty safe area or not.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take long to really glean a lot of that just from continuing to look around and do some research. But overall, yeah, there are some things that are blown out of proportion. There are some things that are absolutely true as far as crime in Portland and in the Portland metro area. We've been sitting here in a park in the heart of Southeast Portland for about the last 4 hours, and I mean, there's several dozen people out here laying around, riding their bike, hanging out, walking their dog. Haven't seen any funny business, so and where we are right now is as much of like a hot spot as any in terms of at least what you hear for things like homelessness and drug use and the things that come along with that.
Yeah. If I could share one thing with the people that are not familiar with the area, that's a complaint that I've heard that's probably a legitimate complaint because it's been acknowledged by the police department and the local media, and that's the response time. The Portland Police Department does not have the staff that they need to be able to respond to all the calls that they get. So one thing when it comes to crime, like Paul mentioned, we're in a tri-county area, Multnomah, Clackamas, Washington County. Haven't heard that complaint from Washington or Clackamas County. So if you're worried about police response time, that is one thing that you might take into consideration, that Multnomah County right now, response time can be not as quick as people would prefer because of shortages of officers.
Yeah. All right, next thing on the list is going to be shopping. So a lot of people want to be near the things that they need as far as being able to shop. And there's probably two primary categories there. There's like groceries and then everything else, your retail shopping, shopping for fun, window shopping, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And so I think for most people, anywhere you live in Portland or in the Portland metro area, you're going to be able to be in a place that is nearby an option for a grocery store. But what those grocery stores are they the ones that you want or prefer? That's where it can get a little bit tricky.
Yeah, right, yeah. I don't know about you, but for some reason, people around here really love Trader Joe's.
Oh, love it.
And every town that doesn't have a Trader Joe's in the Portland metro area is trying to figure out when they're going to get one. So things like that, Costco, Walmart, Fred Meyer, if you're not familiar.
Kroger,
owned by Kroger, right? So all of these stores, kind of like the jobs thing, if you want to be within a certain proximity, sometimes just looking at a map, it can be a little bit tricky. And that's where we can, if you need to be by certain stores, certain shopping, that's where we can pin down exactly where everything is going to be for you.
Yeah, there's going to be areas where you might have quicker access to a Walmart or a Winco, and not be able to get to, like a Whole Foods, for example, or a New Seasons, which I think is just a local chain, but it's very similar to a Whole Foods. And then there's going to be areas where most of your closest options are these, quote unquote higher end or, more expensive grocery stores. So again, there's going to be a lot of variation as far as the neighborhood you're in, where your house is, and your proximity to certain grocery stores. And then on the retail shopping side too, there's going to be areas where you're going to have these big box stores nearby, like your Costco, Walmart, etc. And then there's going to be areas where you can't really you don't really have access to as much of that. But on the other end, there's going to be areas where you have access to a lot of small businesses, boutiques, things like that, commercial entertainment districts in particular in Portland, or in some of kind of the town centers in some of the suburbs. That offer a little bit of a different shopping experience. Similarly too, there's going to be suburbs that have really big, successful shopping malls, and there's going to be some suburbs where their shopping mall has shut down or they never had one. So depending on where you live, again, groceries, retail, big box, it's really going to vary. So depending on what your priority is, that could very well dictate where we end up focusing.
Yeah. All right, next on the list, how about things to do?
Oh, things to do.
Things. So I think this is probably a little bit more relevant for the Portland metro area than other big cities, because people come to Oregon because there's more things to do as far as outdoors than most other states. We've got the coast a couple hours, maybe hour and a half away, depending on where you're at. We've got Mount Hood, the most climbed mountain in North America. We have the Central Oregon High Desert in Central Oregon. We have the Columbia River Gorge. So there's a lot of people that move here that want to have more access to the outdoors.
Wine country.
Wine country, how could I forget, of course. I have talked to people that have told me they've moved here specifically because they wanted to be closer to Oregon wine country. That's very true. So if you're somebody that's like a skier, for example, you're probably going to want to be on the east side of Portland rather than the west side of Portland, because that's going to add at least an hour to your trip both ways when you're going to Mount Hood. If you're somebody that loves to be on the Oregon coast, you're probably going to want to be on the west side. If it's going to take you 2.5 hours to get the Oregon coast from Gresham than it is from like Hillsborough. It's going to take you more like hour and 15 minutes. So a lot of people moving here for all the things to do. And if you're one of those people that, like we've mentioned, Portland is a sprawling area, that can add half an hour and a half to your trip, depending on the things that you like to do: trails, wine country, mountain, coast. So we can really kind of help you to narrow down where's going to be the most ideal location based on your things to do.
Yeah, and more on a localized level too. Your lifestyle, your hobbies, your interests, what you have access to, and the proximity to that can really vary as well. As far as just the parks that are in town, or the community centers. I mean, the different parks and rec districts outside of Portland can really vary as far as what they offer in terms of facilities and classes and things like that. So again, depending on what you're into as far as hobbies, there's going to be areas that are going to suit that better, where you're going to have that more on your doorstep, as opposed to having to maybe travel 30 minutes to get to whatever it may be.
All right, last, how about new versus old?
Yeah, so a lot of people, I think, have a preference for a newer build or a newer community. And newer could be new construction, anywhere up to probably maybe built in the last 20-25 years, all the way to 70, 80, 100-year-old plus homes and communities as well. So you're going to have options for all of that, and it's really going to vary too, like a lot of these categories, as far as what those areas are like, and ultimately what you can get in those areas.
Right. Yeah, we have the end of the Oregon Trail here in the Portland metropolitan area, which is Oregon City. Yeah. So that's
not how we got here.
Right. Oldest incorporated city west of the Rockies. So there's a lot of history here. If you like older towns, old towns, Victorian homes, if you like old towns and old cities, we have that, but we also have a lot of new growth and new development as well too. And those are going to be in both places, east and the west side of Portland. Again, that's what Paul and I are here for, to break down those nuances for you. So if you're somebody that's thinking about taking the next steps, if you have questions about what we've discussed, if you have questions about moving here in the process, we are licensed brokers in the state of Oregon. As much as we love making these videos, we'd love to help you move here as well. So you can call us, text us, email us. You can find all of our contact information below in the description of this video.
And if this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Take care, everyone.